Judge Marcus Williams had seen it all in 8 years on the bench. Drug dealers, murderers, thieves, he'd sentenced them all with steady hands and an unwavering sense of justice. But nothing could have prepared him for what walked through those courtroom doors on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The defendant entered in chains, head down, another case number in an endless stream of broken lives. Just another criminal, or so Marcus thought, until the man looked up. The world stopped. 20 years dissolved in an instant. The courtroom, the gavel, the black robes, everything vanished except for those familiar eyes staring back at him. Eyes that belonged to Tyrone Jackson, the boy who had once been his best friend, his brother, his partner in dreams they'd planned to chase together from the South Side Project. Marcus felt his breath catch as a single question burned through his mind. How do you sentence your childhood best friend to life in prison? What happened next would destroy one man's career, change another man's life forever, and prove that some bonds can't be broken even by 20 years of silence. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Chicago Municipal Courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Judge Marcus Williams adjusted his black robes as he settled into his chair, the familiar weight of authority resting on his shoulder. It was another Tuesday in October, another docket full of cases that would determine the fate of people whose lives had taken unfortunate turns. Marcus had been on the bench for 8 years now, and he prided himself on his fairness, his ability to see past the surface and into the heart of each case. Today's schedule seemed typical, a mix of theft, assault and drug possession charges. Nothing that appeared particularly unusual, at least not at first glance. He reviewed his notes one final time, the names and charges blurring together in a familiar pattern. Another day in the endless cycle of justice, where he would weigh evidence, consider testimony, and make decisions that would echo through people's lives for years to come. The bailiff, Officer Rodriguez, called the first case, the people of Illinois versus Tyrone Jackson. Marcus glanced at the file in front of him, noting the thickness of the folder. Armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, resisting arrest. These were serious charges, carrying potential sentences that could put the defendant away for decades. He looked up as the defendant was brought in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, flanked by 2 court officers. The world seemed to stop. The man standing before him was someone he hadn't seen in over 20 years, but the face was unmistakable. Even beneath the lines of hardship and the exhaustion that seemed to weigh down his shoulders, Marcus recognized him immediately. The high cheekbones, the deep-set eyes, the slight scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident involving a rusty fence. It was Tyrone Jackson, but not just any Tyrone Jackson. This was his Tyrone, his best friend from the south side of Chicago, the boy who had shared his dreams, his fears, and his hopes for a better future. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. His hands, normally steady and confident as they held the gavel, trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the bench. The courtroom, filled with the usual mix of lawyers, reporters, and spectators, suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls closing in around him like the projects they had grown up in. Tyrone's eyes slowly lifted and met his, and for a moment that felt like an eternity. Time seemed suspended. Recognition flickered across Tyrone's weathered face, followed quickly by something that looked like shame mixed with resignation. He quickly looked away, his head dropping as if the weight of the moment of their shared history was too much to bear. But Marcus couldn't look away. His judicial training told him to maintain composure, to treat this like any other case, but his heart was racing back through time, to days when they were just 2 kids from the projects with dreams bigger than their circumstances. They had grown up in the Robert Taylor homes, one of Chicago's most notorious housing projects, where hope seemed as scarce as heat in the winter. Both of their families struggled against poverty that felt like quicksand. The harder they fought, the deeper they seemed to sink. Marcus's mother, Rosa Williams, worked 2 exhausting jobs, cleaning office buildings downtown during the day and stocking shelves at a neighborhood grocery store at night. Her hands were always rough from cleaning chemicals, but her spirit remained unbroken as she pushed her son toward education. Tyrone's story was even more challenging. His grandmother, Miss Dorothy, had taken him in when he was 7 after his mother disappeared one cold February night, leaving behind only a note that said she couldn't do it anymore. Miss Dorothy did laundry for families in the nicer neighborhoods surrounding the projects, her arthritis-swollen hands working through pain because stopping meant not eating. Despite the overwhelming challenges that surrounded them like the concrete walls of their buildings, both boys were determined to escape the cycle of poverty that seemed to trap so many of their neighbors. They spent countless hours together in the cramped 2-bedroom apartment that Marcus shared with his mother and younger sister Keisha, hunched over homework assignments by the light of a single lamp, dreaming of the day they would leave the projects behind forever. "Man, when I get out of here," Tyrone used to say, sprawled across Marcus's bed while they worked on their algebra homework, math books borrowed from the library because they couldn't afford to buy them. "I'm gonna be somebody important. Maybe a doctor who helps kids, or a lawyer who fights for people like us. People gonna look at me and see more than just another kid from the Taylor homes." Marcus would nod enthusiastically, his own dreams equally ambitious despite their circumstances. "We both are, man. We're gonna show them that where you come from doesn't have to determine where you're going. We're gonna change everything." They made a pact that summer before their sophomore year, the kind that only teenage boys can make with complete sincerity and unwavering faith. They would always have each other's backs, no matter what obstacles the world threw at them. They would both make it out of the projects, and they would never forget where they came from or the people who helped them along the way. Most importantly, they would never leave each other behind. But life, as it often does to the dreams of young men from places like the Taylor homes, had other plans entirely. The crack came during junior year when Marcus was accepted into a prestigious academic program. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant less time with Tyrone. Meanwhile, Tyrone was struggling, his grades slipping, as he began hanging with a different crowd. "You think you're better than us now?" Tyrone had said one evening. "You with your college classes and your new friends, you're already gone, man." The final break came on a bitter cold February night during their senior year, just months before graduation and the futures they had once planned to face together. Marcus was in his room, textbooks spread across his desk as he prepared for his SATs, when he heard the familiar wail of sirens piercing the night air. Police sirens, ambulance sirens, fire truck sirens, they had become the soundtrack of life in the projects, as common as the sound of children playing or televisions blaring through thin walls. This time, however, the sirens seemed different, more urgent, and they were getting closer. When the flashing red and blue lights stopped right outside his building, casting eerie shadows across his bedroom wall, Marcus felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Tyrone had been arrested that night, caught holding a bag of drugs that he swore didn't belong to him, but that he couldn't adequately explain away to the arresting officers. According to Tyrone's frantic explanation later, he had been trying to help a friend, someone he called Little Mike, who was known around the neighborhood for getting into situations he couldn't handle. The friend had asked Tyrone to hold the package while he handled some business inside one of the buildings, promising it would only be for a few minutes. But those few minutes had stretched into an hour, and when the police conducted one of their routine sweeps of the area, they found Tyrone standing on the corner, nervous and alone, holding a bag that contained enough cocaine to constitute intent to distribute. The friend, Little Mike, had vanished into the maze of project buildings, leaving Tyrone to face the music alone, his protests of innocence falling on deaf ears. Marcus's mother, Rosa, was adamant and uncompromising when she learned about Tyrone's arrest. "That boy is on a path to destruction," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and disappointment as she paced their small living room. "You have a future ahead of you, Marcus. A real future. Don't throw it away for someone who's already made their choice." The weight of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He wanted to fight her, to defend his childhood friend, to argue that Tyrone deserved support during the darkest moment of his young life. But he also understood the logic behind her position. He was mere weeks away from graduating as valedictorian, months away from starting college on a full academic scholarship that would cover tuition, room, board, and books. Getting involved in Tyrone's legal troubles could jeopardize everything he had worked so hard to achieve. So Marcus made a choice that would haunt him for the next 20 years. A decision that would follow him through law school, through his early career as a prosecutor, and eventually onto the judge's bench where he now sat. He chose his future over his friend. He stayed away from the courthouse, stayed focused on his studies and his scholarship applications, and let Tyrone face his fate alone in a system that was rarely kind to young black men from the projects. The last time Marcus saw his friend during those devastating weeks, Tyrone was being led away from the courthouse in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, his head held high despite the circumstances, but his eyes scanning the crowd of supporters, family members and curious onlookers for the one familiar face that wasn't there. Marcus had wanted to go, had started getting dressed to attend the sentencing hearing, but at the last moment, fear and self-preservation had won out over loyalty and love. Now, more than 20 years later, they were face to face again in circumstances that neither of them could have predicted during those days when they sat on Marcus's bed planning their escape from poverty. The irony was not lost on Marcus. He was the one in the position of ultimate power and authority, wearing the black robes that symbolized justice and impartiality, while Tyrone was the one in chains, accused of crimes that could send him away for what remained of his productive adult life. Marcus forced himself to focus on the present moment, on the legal proceedings that demanded his professional attention and judicial temperament. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed woman named Jennifer Coleman who had built her career on high-profile convictions, began her opening statement with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the winning cards. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she said, her voice clear and authoritative as it carried across the packed courtroom, "this case is about a man who made a series of violent and calculated choices that put innocent people at serious risk. On the night of October 15th, the defendant, Tyrone Jackson, entered a convenience store on the south side of Chicago armed with a handgun. He threatened the young clerk working alone that night, demanded money from the cash register, and when the terrified employee hesitated for even a moment, the defendant struck him across the face with his weapon before fleeing the scene with approximately $300 in cash. Marcus listened to each word of the charges, feeling them hit him like physical blows to his chest. This wasn't the Tyrone he remembered from their childhood, the boy who once spent his lunch money to buy food for a stray cat that had been hanging around their building, who had once carried an elderly neighbor's groceries up 4 flights of stairs every week without being asked, who had cried when they found a bird with a broken wing and insisted they try to nurse it back to health. But then again, 20 years was an entire lifetime, and Marcus had learned through his years on the bench that life had a way of changing people in ways that weren't always predictable, fair, or kind. The prosecutor continued methodically, outlining the evidence against Tyrone with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. There was surveillance footage from the convenience store, though it was admittedly grainy and unclear due to poor lighting and an outdated security system. There was the testimony of the store clerk, a young man named David Kim who had been working alone that terrifying night. Most damning of all, there was the fact that Tyrone had been found just 3 blocks away from the scene of the crime, though notably, the gun allegedly used in the robbery had never been recovered despite extensive searches of the area. The defense attorney, Sarah Martinez, looked young and overworked. "The prosecution wants you to believe this is simple," she told the jury. "But I ask you to look closer, to question assumptions made about Mr. Jackson based on his appearance and past mistakes." David Kim's testimony was devastating. Nervous but consistent, he described the robbery in detail. "He came in around 11:30. At first, I thought he was just another customer, but then he pulled out this gun. When asked if he could identify his attacker, David pointed directly at Tyrone. Yes, that's him right there." The surveillance footage showed a figure in dark clothing entering the store. The arresting officer testified that Tyrone matched the description and was found with $240 in cash. But during cross-examination, cracks appeared. The lighting was poor, the encounter brief, the identification made under trauma. The money could have come from anywhere. When it came time for the defense, only 2 witnesses were called. First, Tyrone's grandmother. "Tyrone is a good boy," she said firmly. "He's made mistakes, but he's not violent." Then came the moment Marcus had been dreading and anticipating. Tyrone took the stand. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus would hear his childhood friend's voice. Tyrone was sworn in, his voice steady as he promised to tell the truth. "Miss Jackson," Sarah began, "where were you on the evening of October 15th? Tyrone looked directly at the jury. "I was at my grandmother's house until about 10:30. Then I walked to buy her medicine for her. The pharmacy was closed, so I was walking to the all-night drugstore when the police stopped me." "Did you rob the convenience store that Mr. Kim was working at?" "No, ma'am, I did not." "Where did the money found in your possession come from?" Tyrone hesitated. "I had been working odd jobs around the neighborhood, helping people move furniture, cleaning garages. I usually get paid in cash." The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal, systematically going through Tyrone's criminal history from that first arrest in high school through years of drug possession, theft, and assault charges. "Miss Jackson," the prosecutor said mockingly, "you're asking this jury to believe that despite your extensive criminal history, despite being found 3 blocks from a robbery scene with cash in your pocket, you had nothing to do with this crime." "Yes, ma'am," Tyrone replied, his voice never wavering. "Because it's the truth." As Tyrone stepped down, Marcus caught his eye for just a moment. In that brief glance, he saw not anger but disappointment, the same look Tyrone had given him 20 years ago when Marcus failed to show up at the courthouse. The next morning brought closing arguments. The prosecutor reminded the jury of their duty to protect society, while Sarah pleaded for them to see beyond the surface and consider reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim. In the case of the people of Illinois versus Tyrone Jackson, we find the defendant guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Tyrone's grandmother sobbed. Tyrone himself showed no reaction, simply nodding, as if he'd expected this outcome. Marcus scheduled sentencing for the following week. The mandatory minimums meant Tyrone would spend the next 15 to 20 years in prison. As Tyrone was led away, he turned and looked directly at Marcus. Their eyes met, and Marcus saw profound sadness that encompassed not just this moment, but all the moments that had led to it. That evening, Marcus sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. His wife Angela found him hours later. "Marcus? What's wrong?" "I knew him," Marcus said simply. "The defendant. I knew him when we were kids." Angela's eyes widened. "You should have recused yourself." "I know, but I thought maybe I could make sure he got a fair trial. I thought maybe I owed him that much." Marcus told her about their childhood friendship, their shared dreams, and the night he chose to protect his own future instead of standing by his friend. "Do you think he did it?" Angela finally asked. Marcus considered the question. "I don't know. The evidence suggests he did. But there's reasonable doubt, and I'm not sure the jury really considered it. I think they saw his record and made up their minds. So what are you going to do?" The sentencing hearing was scheduled for Friday. Marcus spent the week wrestling with his conscience, researching legal precedents, trying to find a path that would honor both his duty as a judge and his obligation as a human being. On Friday morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out that Judge Williams might be considering an unusual sentence. Marcus entered with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. He had made his decision. "Mr. Jackson," Marcus began, looking directly at Tyrone, "you have been found guilty of armed robbery and assault. Under the sentencing guidelines, I am required to impose a sentence of no less than 15 years in state prison." Tyrone stood silent. His grandmother sobbed quietly. "However," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength, "I have serious concerns about whether justice has truly been served. The evidence against you, while sufficient to convince a jury, is largely circumstantial. There are no fingerprints, no DNA, no clear surveillance footage." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "Therefore, I am setting aside the jury's verdict and ordering a new trial. Furthermore, I am releasing you on your own recognizance pending that trial. This is not a declaration of your innocence, but it is a recognition that our system failed you today." The courtroom exploded. The prosecutor objected strenuously while supporters cheered. "Furthermore," Marcus continued once order was restored, I am recusing myself from any future proceedings due to a conflict of interest I should have disclosed at the beginning. As Marcus left the bench for the last time, he felt both loss and liberation. He knew his career was over, but for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he had done the right thing. Outside the courthouse, Marcus approached Tyrone, who stood with his grandmother and supporters. "Why?" Tyrone asked simply. "Because I should have been there 20 years ago, and I wasn't. Because everyone deserves someone to stand up for them when the system fails. Because you're my friend, and I forgot that for too long." Tyrone studied his face, then slowly extended his hand. Marcus took it, and they shook hands like the children they had once been. "Thank you," Tyrone said. "Don't thank me yet. You still have to face another trial. This time, make sure you have a better lawyer." Tyrone smiled for the first time since Marcus had seen him. "I will. And Marcus, whatever happens next, I'm glad you remembered who you used to be." Marcus was indeed removed from the bench, but he found a new calling as a defense attorney. Tyrone's second trial ended in acquittal when new evidence emerged. He became an advocate for criminal justice reform. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday afternoons, two old friends would sit on a porch on the south side, watching children play and remembering their shared dreams. They had learned that the path to justice is rarely straight, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on the people who matter most. In the end, they had both found their way home. They had made up their minds. "So what are you going to do?" The sentencing hearing was Friday. Marcus spent the week wrestling with his conscience, researching legal precedents, trying to find a path that would honor both his duty as a judge and his obligation as a human being. Friday morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out that Judge Williams might be considering an unusual sentence. Marcus entered with a heavy heart but a clear mind. "Mr. Jackson," Marcus began, looking directly at Tyrone, "you have been found guilty of armed robbery and assault. Under the sentencing guidelines, I am required to impose a sentence of no less than 15 years in state prison." Tyrone stood silent. His grandmother sobbed quietly. "However," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength, "I have serious concerns about whether justice has truly been served. The evidence against you, while sufficient to convince a jury, is largely circumstantial. There are no fingerprints, no DNA, no clear surveillance footage." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "Therefore, I am setting aside the jury's verdict and ordering a new trial. Furthermore, I am releasing you on your own recognizance pending that trial. This is not a declaration of your innocence, but it is a recognition that our system failed you today." The courtroom exploded. The prosecutor objected strenuously while supporters cheered. Furthermore, Marcus continued once order was restored, "I am recusing myself from any future proceedings due to a conflict of interest I should have disclosed at the beginning." As Marcus left the bench for the last time, he felt both loss and liberation. He knew his career was over, but for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he had done the right thing. Outside the courthouse, Marcus approached Tyrone, who stood with his grandmother and supporters. "Why?" Tyrone asked simply. "Because I should have been there 20 years ago, and I wasn't. Because everyone deserves someone to stand up for them when the system fails. Because you're my friend, and I forgot that for too long." Tyrone studied his face, then slowly extended his hand. Marcus took it, and they shook hands like the children they had once been. "Thank you," Tyrone said. "Don't thank me yet. You still have to face another trial. This time, make sure you have a better lawyer." Tyrone smiled for the first time since Marcus had seen him. "I will. And Marcus, whatever happens next, I'm glad you remembered who you used to be." Marcus was indeed removed from the bench, but he found a new calling as a defense attorney. Tyrone's second trial ended in acquittal when new evidence emerged. He became an advocate for criminal justice reform. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday afternoons, two old friends would sit on a porch on the south side watching children play and remembering their shared dreams. They had learned that the path to justice is rarely straight, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on the people who matter most. In the end, they had both found their way home.